Welcome back to Ambivalent Offenders. This is Jamie,
And this is Erin.
and we are back to Yoko's story today. Are we ready to finish it up today, Erin?
Yeah, I'm excited, although I'll be sad to move away from Yoko, but the first part was a good little appetizer, so this will be good to dive in.
Yeah, like I said, I actually became more interested and I felt like more invested in Yoko as I was doing my research. Maybe a little protective, which we'll see in the judgment phase. So we'll find out.
Yeah, that's always so hard. It's like writers, you start to love your characters, love your subject. For most of them, I start to get a little bit protective of, even if they don't necessarily deserve it. Although that's not always the case. I was pretty hard on Werner von Braun.
Yeah. And obviously Nixon, I was not like, I was like, oh, I didn't realize his humble roots, but you know,
there's also the Nixon of it all.
Right. So into that though, I want to shout out Diane B for joining us on Patreon. I believe this is Diane B of Our Mother's Friends.
Hi, Diane. She's a huge Beatles fan, so she's been looking forward to this Yoko episode for a while. So shout out, Diane.
Yeah.
This one's dedicated to you.
I can't remember if her or one of Mom's other friends also had another suggestion, which we won't bring up now.
I think I know which one. I can say it because we cut it.
So yeah, we'll talk about Yoko before, I mean, your next one, we're going way back.
Yeah.
I didn't even mean to make a bad Beatles pun. Get back. We're going.
Oh, I can confirm. I don't think that's in the script, so I can confirm
It's not in the script. Oh, that's bad.
No, it's perfect.
Get back. We're going way back.
Do you want me to preview, or should I do that at the end if we're talking on it?
You can tell us. Just give us a little snippet.
We're going to ancient Egypt, which we've been to ancient Rome. We're going even further back. We're going to talk about the husband of Nefertiti, who you might know. She has the famous bust, very gorgeous. Her husband, Akhenaten, is sometimes called a heretic. He's sometimes called a madman or a tyrant. Also, he's been called a revolutionary or a visionary. We're going to be talking about him.
Wasn't that funny how they get those?
It could be either one. Yeah. This one will be a little bit different than our usual because you don't have a court historian. It's a couple thousand years back. So they're still piecing things together. And to put it in context, he might be the father of Tutankhamun. He might not. He might be the grandfather. We don't know. He's definitely related. It should be a good one. And I've been starting to work on for Patreon to do a little bit about Nefertiti herself because she's also fascinating and someone we think we know more about just because of the bust than we actually do. We actually don't know too much about her, but we will be talking about Nefertiti. The beautiful one has come, as her name means.
Great. Well, speaking of Patreon, you can join us. We have the link in our description. There's a free membership, and then there's a $3 a month tier and a $5 a month tier. You get bonus content. Erin was already talking about. I am planning on doing a little more on the Get Back sessions. Originally released as the Let It Be documentary, and then Peter Jackson expanded it with, like he does, finding hundreds of hours of more footage and putting it into Get Back.
I must confess, I haven't watched it, which is crazy. I love the Beatles, but I have not had a chance.
I haven't watched all of it, so there's 3 parts, but I did watch quite a few chunks of it over the last week because of what I'll be talking about today. Focusing in on Yoko, but also I texted Erin. I'm like, I forgot how hot Paul McCartney was in this era with the beard.
That's peak Paul. I know I'm not a Paul person, but when he has the beard, there's something
I
about
know.
it.
But then I looked it up and he's only 26.
Oh, geez.
26 or 27. I was like, what? I mean, I know people always talk about that, right? Because when the Beatles broke up, but they just look so much older. Like, I knew George was the youngest, but I was like, Paul's got to be 32, 33. And I'm like, 26. Oh, anyway, just a side note. Had to throw that in there.
Lock us up.
Yeah. That's not judging him based on anything besides his style and looks. I was just like, yeah, he's got it really going on.
Peak Paul McCartney, definitely.
Although I have a moment, Paul, that blew my mind away. I think you're going to have a good reaction too.
Oh, no.
Not a good reaction, but a reaction that will come out of it. So we ended last time with Yoko and John's collaborative art. That was the last section that we did. Today, I'm going to be moving on to her controversial art, like her own private art, and its impact. Even today, as I was mostly watching the Get Back footage on Disney Plus, which you can stream it there.
Disney, if you want to sponsor us.
Yeah, shout out Disney.
Also available on Disney Plus. Just kidding.
But there were a few clips I was trying to find specifically on YouTube. And again, anytime Yoko shows up, those comments, somebody always has to bring up some really interesting Yoko things, even if, well, I'm going to talk about what she's doing in the footage.
I'm not surprised. We already talked to the first part. She's still a very controversial figure, even in the world of people who love the Beatles, people who love John.
Right. Yeah, even with Beatles fans, if not more with Beatles fans. And people who make fun of her art, make fun of her singing. As we acknowledged in the first episode, her art, like much art, is very subjective, right? Some people might love it. Some people might hate it. You might not understand it. Same with her singing. Might not be your thing. Especially because the work she's doing is very avant-garde, not in the mainstream. So it's not for everybody, but just like our podcast, it's not necessarily for everybody, right? I'm not going to read you a Wikipedia article about Yoko Ono, some movies, some podcasts, some songs.
We should try to be a little bit more professional. Shout out Jean
from Michigan. Talk more professional. Aaron, I'm going to talk very professional to you as my twin sister.
Okay.
In this very professional setting with both of us in pajamas.
It's the same thing. And not that I'm comparing us with Yoko because that's, but it's all subjective. And just because you don't like it doesn't mean that it's not good. I mean, you don't have to announce that you don't like something. If you don't like something, just keep scrolling. It might not be for you, but it could be for somebody.
Right.
That goes for anything. So
yeah,
you don't have to announce it to the world.
Which, speaking of that, if you want to leave a kind review, tell us what you like about us, our show, about us. Yeah, just tell us about us. No, I'm kidding. About our show, about a favorite episode, something that you enjoy particularly about our show. You can leave those in reviews. Reviews are really nice. Obviously, you always get the polarizing ones. You get the people who are very enthusiastic and then people who are like, yeah, this is the worst. I hate this. Please get vocal surgery and change your voice.
I know that's always a rough one. I'm sorry, guys. I don't love my voice either, but I can't change it.
I know.
If I could speak with a British accent and have a beautiful melodic voice, I would have.
It's just so funny because as somebody who taught middle school and high school students for so long, who could be like the cruelest, meanest, pick up your insecurities with the tiniest little thing. Nobody ever made fun of my voice. I never once got a comment about my voice until with adults and podcasting.
It's a missed opportunity.
They had to hear me for hours upon hours a day. But anyway, we always appreciate the reviews or even just a quick rating. That's always great too. So even if you want to take 2 seconds, scroll down. If you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever platform, you can always just do a star rating. Or you can write a quick review. Even those reviews that are super short, we really appreciate. We posted some on Instagram. They help us, I think, in that motivation because, like we said, this is our side hustle, side gig.
Surprisingly, we're not ranking in tons of money from this.
No. We do this for our own enjoyment on top of our other work and lives. But it is something we love to do. Hearing from you all makes us motivated to continue to do it. And then by joining our Patreon, or even in your review mentioning people you want to see covered, all of that are things that we love to hear and can help continue to help us push on our podcast. So I think enough of that. We'll get back to Yoko and her controversial arts as a solo artist and its impact. As I mentioned in the last episode, I want to be clear that Yoko was an artist in her own right, especially before meeting John. It wasn't like suddenly she became only an avant-garde artist because she suddenly had all this money or influence. She was very well known in her community beforehand, in the avant-garde art community. And this section on her is going to be her work outside of the John and Yoko duo. So while Yoko Ono is often remembered in the shadow of John Lennon, I would say, her solo art career tells a much bigger story, one of bold ideas, quiet rebellion, and decades of really pushing boundaries. So even now, as she's in her, I think she's now at 93. I just looked that up the other day. I just want to double check. 92 years old.
We look to see there. I couldn't remember if it's something about her art or if she's doing another exhibition.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that she's still working. Oh, yeah. Exhibition Yoko Ono Music of the Mind, which is in Berlin, I believe.
I was watching on YouTube an academic seminar on her work. She's definitely one whose work is still being evaluated, critiqued, and talked about its themes and how it's impacted the art world. I'm going to rewind to the beginning of her art. Some of this will overlap with what I talked about earlier, but some of it will be a little different. And see how her art was different than what we'd think of as kind of as traditional art of the time. So 1966, the same year she met John Lennon, that year Yoko held a solo exhibition at London's Indica Gallery called Unfinished Paintings and Objects. It was actually full of interactive pieces that invited the audience to complete the work, similar to the one I was talking about earlier, the one where she had audience members come up and cut up parts of her clothing.
Yeah.
In this one, though, she had ones like painting to be stepped on, where audience members literally walked across a canvas, or add color painting, which provided brushes and paint so people could add their own marks. She even created a chess set where all the pieces and squares were white, titled Play It by Trust, which was a metaphor for peace and mutual understanding.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, I like that a lot.
I feel like a lot of that's more things we see today, right? With interactive pieces. I know here in Minneapolis, I had gone to an exhibit mostly focused on incarceration, and where they had cells and bars and you walk through this or this garden of peace, but more interactive pieces. And I can definitely see that in the 1960s being, for some people, like, this isn't art. It's not a painting on a wall. I don't understand, right?
Yeah, we talked about it in the first part about people going in and expecting to see Van Gogh or Rembrandt and then having to interact with it. It's a different way of approaching art, especially back then. Because of people like Yoko, it's much more common nowadays, but I can imagine showing up there in 62 and being like, I just wanted to look at something pretty.
Right. I have to walk across this piece of art. What? Yeah, just have a different idea of it. That same spirit of participation that carried through really her entire career. Her 1964 book, Grapefruit, which I mentioned when I talked about getting credit for writing Imagine. It was a collection of poetic, often absurd instructions like, listen to a heartbeat, or imagine letting a goldfish swim across the sky. It blurred the line between art and life, and it's still in print today. And in the decades since, Yoko's solo work has spanned performance, installation, video, and sound. I'll talk about her Wish Tree series, which began in the 1960s and continues today, which combines art with activism. Much of the case, as I talked in the last episode, John and Yoko's art, those two things were married together. It's such a simple piece of art installation, but it's so powerful. This is one that I got to see, which I'll talk about here shortly. And she's also tackled the darker themes. So not all of it has been like these, I don't know, wistful, I don't want to say absurd in like a crazy way, but leaning into things that are different. She's tackled deeper themes in her work too. So, for example, in 2013, she debuted Arising, a piece that invited women to submit personal accounts of abuse, accompanied by a photo of their eyes. So it was raw, painful, and obviously at a time, and still at a time, that's deeply necessary.
Yeah.
Even just saying that right now, I got to chill up my spine, that idea of eyes, right? How eyes show us so much.
Yeah, you can see pain. They're the windows to the soul. I love the idea of that. It's a subject that it's more, I don't want to say more emotional than peace and all that, but it's heavier. It's a heavier topic it's got some weight to it. If you're just thinking, oh, it was the 60s, she was just doing what everybody else was doing in terms of peace and love. It's like there's more to her than just that.
Yeah, and definitely staying relevant to social issues at various times, right? Like the idea of women's rights, abuse, things like that.
She's never shied away from that, which I think a lot of people want her to just be quiet and talk just about John's legacy, which she has. She's been a huge proponent of his legacy, but that she's continued to do her own stuff as well.
Yeah, and it's provocative, right? It can step on people's toes who don't want to hear those things, right? Who are maybe not of a certain liberal feeling. It's hard to feel like somebody could say that's gimmicky, but she's always inviting other people into her art, letting them experience it, share things. And I think sometimes with that, people feel like, who's really doing the art? Even though you have to conceptualize this, you have to come up with this idea.
Even if it's not a finished piece, she's created the idea and she knows what ultimately it's going to look like, even if she's not doing each little brushstroke or something.
Right. Right. They're submitting their accounts of abuse. It's like they're the ones who are doing, quote unquote, the work. Like they're writing it. But the idea of her taking these and making it into a bigger piece and leaving it raw, not changing their words, all of those are artistic decisions that she's making to say something. I think that's really important. And the fact that she hasn't slowed down, as you were just saying, that there's exhibitions with her work still going on. In the 80s and 90s, she continued to exhibit globally, from MoMA in New York to the Tate Modern in London. Her work has always remained fiercely relevant, which we just talked about. This idea of, in the 2010s and today, talking about feminism and female experiences or female abuse at the hands of men. Those are fiercely relevant. And they're often centered around healing, which we've talked about. And you can see that connected to her life. The story of her daughter that we talked about in the part 1. Feminism and peace. I think that all connects to a famous quote of hers that she said, "My art is my life and my life is my art." There's not a
differentiation.
Right. There's a 5 p.m. I'm shutting down my computer. I'm leaving the office. I'm not thinking about it. Like, her art comes from her life and what she experiences or what she sees out in the world.
It's clear that she's not going to stop until she's gone, which is admirable because she's got that Beatles money. She could, she's done a lot of influential things with her art over the years. To be continuing to create and innovate decades after decades is impressive. Regardless of how people feel about, we talked that some people don't like her art, but to continue to do that decade after decade, when you really don't have to. The people who know art have said great things about you. There's not really much more to achieve. Right, honestly, for her, but to continue to do it and show up is admirable.
Yeah, she has nothing to prove at this point. It's about continuing to do that. And activism, peace, not just as a slogan, but as practice. So we talked about John and Yoko's focus on peace earlier, but even after John's murder in 1980, Yoko didn't retreat. She really doubled down. She turned grief into action and art into activism. So this is one of her most powerful tributes that I think is really beautiful. You can look it up if you want here while I'm talking about it. It's called the Imagine Peace Tower in Iceland.
I've heard the name. I don't know if I've seen, or maybe I've seen it, but it's been a while.
Yeah, I'm going to pull it up actually while I talk about it. We'll put a picture on our Instagram so you can see it as well. So you'll see what we're talking about. One of her most powerful tributes is this Imagine Peace Tower in Iceland. It's not just a monument, but it's actually a beam of light. You'll see the light that shoots into the sky from a wishing well on an island that's powered entirely by geothermal energy. And the words Imagine Peace are carved into the base in 24 different languages, which you can guess why, that idea of peace across the globe. And Yoko said she chose Iceland because it's one of the most peaceful countries in the world and because the light could shine far into the sky. In some other places, it wouldn't be as visible. And it's really, truly wanted to be seen as a beacon of hope. Okay, and I'm going to try not to cry because her love of John comes into it. So the tower is lit every year from John's birthday, which is October 9th, to the anniversary of his death, which is December 8th. So she once said, quote, by contrasting the two symbolic dates, it gives an understanding of the shortness of life and the eternity of the spirit.
Yoko.
I know. I'm like, nah, I'm not crying, I swear.
I can't cry. I already cried during our Mary Todd Lincoln one, so try not to repeat that. I teared up a little bit.
I did too.
It's a beautiful tribute.
It is. I can only imagine John, and whatever you believe or wherever he's at, would love that tribute. And something about those dates, again, talking about birthday and anniversary of his death and that.
That encompasses everything about mankind, doesn't it?
Right.
What you want the world to look like.
Right. You want peace for everybody, where there not to be conflict and violence, and also recognizing that our time as people, right, are little blips. But also John Lennon, well, he only lived 40 years. He will continue to live on through all of this, through people he inspired, whether inspired musicians, inspired artists, inspired, obviously, Yoko, things like that.
That is eternal. That's what you can see in the Imagine Peace Tower.
Yeah. And another one that we can show on our Instagram is Yoko's wish tree installations. These are set up in cities around the world, and they invite people to write down their hopes and tie them to a tree.
I have seen these ones.
Yep. And I've actually went to one. Erin, this was on a family vacation you didn't go to.
Oh, yeah.
It's a simple concept. And for some people, they might be like, oh, it's so gimmicky, writing down your hopes, you're putting it on a tree. But it was really deeply moving when I saw it in college. This is when we visited Montreal on a family vacation. Again, same vacation. If you're a loyal listener, you might remember Rupert the Ghost from Maine. Erin sadly wasn't there, but they had also an exhibit on the bed and done there. And we have some pictures of the wish tree installation. And as a young college student, as I said, I found it very visceral. Even our brother, so at that time he was maybe a freshman in high school, late middle school. I know he really enjoyed it as well, but it isn't something that I feel like, okay, you have to be a wise old person or think you're a wise old person like a college student.
It's whimsical, it's hopeful, it's all these things. But whoever you are approaching it, I think you can see something different, which is, I think, the purpose of it.
Yeah. And one part about it that I didn't know is that over 1 million of those wishes have been collected and actually buried beneath the Peace Tower.
Oh, wow.
So turning personal dreams into a collective monument. I had no clue about that. And I thought that was such a great way, again, to connect her art and people's vision all together.
Yeah, it brings it all together. That is really beautiful.
She's also used billboards, books, and even children's picture stories to spread her message, talking about current events. In 2022, she lit the Peace Tower out of that usual season of John's, again, birth date and date of death to show solidarity with Ukraine. In a 2007 speech, she said, quote, anybody who's participating in the peace industry is making the world better. Let's make it bigger than the war industry, end quote. And that's classic Yoko. Idealistic, maybe, you might be like, okay, Yoko good talking about peace, but also fiercely intentional, right? We know the war industry, making of weapons, that is an issue. That is something that's been talked about.
I think that topic has always been there. You know, it's not like it went away after Vietnam and all that, but it's particularly on our minds as we see things erupt in Ukraine and the Middle East.
Yeah. And of course, as we keep saying, not everyone has embraced her activism. Some critics dismiss it as naive or performative. But as you said, she's never stopped. She doesn't have to keep doing these things. So whether it's marching, speaking, or even just handing out white flowers, Yoko's message has stayed the same, that peace isn't passive, that it's a choice we make over and over again. Those are all those pieces that she keeps coming back to.
I think it's bullshit. Like, I get it is performative, but that's what art is. She's not being like, I alone am going to solve Ukraine. She's not there to solve the Ukraine problem. She's not meeting with Putin and Zelensky. She's putting that out there. And of course it's hopeful because the idea of peace, and it might be hopeful, wishful thinking, but what else do we have?
Right. That's what I mean.
Unless you go into cynicism, but she's never been about cynicism.
Right. Even after her love of her life, her partner in art and life was killed at 40, there's a lot of ways your life can go from there. And to me, in a world that feels like it's constantly unraveling, like her, if anything, stubborn belief in love and peace, if anything, feels more radical than ever, that she's like,
it does. That's a perfect way of putting it.
We can choose peace. And that's what I really like, that idea that peace isn't passive. It's a choice.
Mm-hmm.
We can make the decision to do this. And it's a hard decision.
It's easy to hate. It's easy to get into these cycles that we have around the world, to hate to other people. But it's perhaps harder in a way to decide, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to choose peace. We're going to stop these cycles of violence. That's what she's been a proponent of. I think it's beautiful and consistent. Obviously, she can't solve the world on her own, but to put that out of the universe, that's her way, using her platform, which is massive.
Yes. She always integrates the personal with the political or with the message. And like you said, it's been consistent. And in some ways, people could be like, well, again, if you're thinking of it as a critic,
move on.
Like, oh, you're making money off of this 1960s things you did with John. But it's beyond that, right? There's no reason she has to speak out about Ukraine. At this point, it's not going to change her legacy or how people view her. She's still going to get the same people who are rolling their eyes and the same people who like it. This is how she expresses herself. And I think you have to give her credit for that.
It's what we do in this podcast, isn't it? You look at an action by somebody and you can see it in a sinister or a calculating way, or you could see it in a different way.
It's all about perspective, right?
Yeah, you could see it in, oh, she's trying to make money, which I don't think she's pressed for cash. She doesn't need an extra couple bucks in her pocket. Thank you very much.
Right.
That I feel like rings false, but people look at it and her actions in different ways based on what they want to think of her or how they think of her intentions.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You can take whatever you see and you can put it through a certain viewpoint and skew it how you want, depending on how you want to frame it. That's kind of your choice. The biggest segment is probably the one that most people have been waiting for, has been on the blame game of her and the Beatles breakup.
Oh, no.
So I have already mentioned you can't talk about Yoko without talking about peace. And it's also true you can't talk about Yoko Ono without talking about the backlash, especially in regards to the Beatles and their breakup. So far, things have been pretty positive, full of love, partnership, making art. Obviously, we've mentioned John's murder. That was a dark point, but even using that to inspire her art. But when you mention Yoko Ono to anyone, as we said in that first episode, what's usually the first thing that they say?
She broke up the Beatles. She's a verb.
Yes.
Yoko Ono things.
100%. For decades, she's been the go-to scapegoat for the breakup of the Beatles. Fans have pointed fingers. Headlines pointed fingers. And really this myth took hold. Yoko broke up the band. But like most myths, the truth is way more complicated. Let's start with it. Beatles historian. So Mark Lewison, one of the most respected Beatles historians, put it plainly, quote, Yoko was vilified unfairly as a scapegoat, but the story is far more complex, end quote. And he's right. The Beatles were already drifting apart creatively, personally, spiritually, long before Yoko entered the picture. But at times her presence, especially in the studio, which I'm going to talk about, was something people grabbed onto, whether it was the fans or even some of the Beatles members themselves. And we'll talk about that. Let's take the example of the original Let It Be documentary about the filming of Let It Be and the performance. And then I would say more recently, what people have probably seen is Peter Jackson's Get Back series, which I don't want to say reframe the footage, but he took hours and hours and hours that were not included to really, I think, give a fuller picture of what was happening. So obviously they didn't film this going in being like, let's show the Beatles breaking up. It was showing how over 14 days they were having to write 14 songs, practice, and then perform them. It's pretty remarkable when you see that on. That was something that just blew my mind.
That's crazy.
People who watched the original documentary really focused in on Yoko because as the Beatles are playing and practicing, she's there. She's sitting right next to John almost all of the time.
We've all seen the pictures. We've seen the video footage. Even if you haven't watched the documentary, these are the ones that, if you've seen her in studio, it's this.
It's this, yes. But here's the thing. Watching it now, as I said, especially after Peter Jackson took way more footage than anybody else has seen, hundreds of hours to create Get Back, there's definitely a different perspective. So I'm going to share with you a video. We probably won't be able to post it on our Instagram because it's from Disney. First, I'm going to send it to you. I'll let you watch it. It's really short. And then you can just tell the viewers what's happening in this. This is, again, from Peter Jackson's Get Back.
We could probably link it in the show notes.
Yeah. Yep. I can timestamp it, or you can see what she's doing just with the screenshot.
She's sitting next to John. They're playing music, and she's reading a newspaper. She pulls it out. She's flipping through it. The ending shot makes it look like Ringo's kind of giving her the side eye a little bit.
And then there's another one. I'm not going to send you. I'll explain it to you. There's an empty chair. Then she comes back, and she's just sitting casually. She pulls out, I think, a pamphlet or something. Again, she's just reading. So here's the thing, especially with Peter Jackson's Get Back, Yoko doesn't come off as disruptive. Yes, she's there. She's just there, but she's not interfering. She's not giving orders. People, when they originally have her in the narrative, they talk about how she was imposing her opinions on John and the Beatles. That's the narrative that comes off. And you watch this and you can see her. Sometimes she's knitting. Sometimes she's rolling joints, like for them. Right? So she's not giving orders. She's just existing in a space that had always been traditionally a boys' club.
In the clips, too, I'm sure you'll say, we do see some of the other, like Linda Eastman, who is Paul's girlfriend. I don't think they're married at the time.
Yep.
That she appears. So she's not even like she's the only female or girlfriend / wife that's in here. She's not even that. Obviously, Linda doesn't get quite the same backlash to her as Yoko does.
No. And on our Patreon, as a little side note, I do talk about the wives and the girlfriends of the Beatles and their reputations and how that compares to Yoko. But just as Aaron said, yes, even though the narrative that people always said was the Beatles, very much recording in their own little kind of circle bubble. But when you watch the Get Back footage, you see a random friend of George Harrison's. Yeah, you see Linda.
There's a lot of people coming
right.
and going.
Linda's in there talking with the group at one point.
Linda's daughter's in there, so it's like you
Yes.
got a little kid.
Right. And yes, Yoko is literally sitting next to John. So like they're all like sitting in a little circle, and yes, she's sitting right next to John, which puts her much, much closer than I think most people are used to seeing. But she's not interfering. She's not giving orders, like I said. And Peter Jackson even came to Yoko Ono's defense in a 60 Minutes interview. He was promoting the documentary, saying that the footage he had access to never shows Yoko imposing her opinions on the Beatles. And having come through hundreds of hours of footage to create Get Back, Jackson has far more than most. Like, he's seen far more than most, right? If he's the authority, I would say, on it.
Yeah, he's probably outside of the Beatles and their close circle. He's as close to that as you're going to get.
Right. And he emphasizes that Yoko's presence simply reflected her being part of the space, not trying to control it. You never see her like stop them mid-song and be like, oh, you should do this, or whisper to John about this. She's existing. She's there, as I said, knitting, sometimes reading.
This goes back to my comment of depending on how you see her as you interpret those. It's like, is she sinister? She's like, oh, this sinister woman. She's just sitting there exerting control. She doesn't even have to say anything. She
Right.
could just be there. And she's got John under her finger.
Yeah.
Or you could just see a woman reading a newspaper, just hanging out.
Right.
Could be either one.
So let's talk about, I guess, later talking about it. So Howard Stern interviewed Paul McCartney in 2013 about the Get Back sessions, and Paul admits that, quote, let's face it, we didn't welcome Yoko into the studio because we thought it was a guy thing, end quote. He acknowledged that the Beatles weren't used to having partners that present during recording, and that Yoko's constant presence was jarring at times. But I'm going to get back to Paul because he's going to say something else. But as Aaron already said, you'll notice that there's other people in the studio during that time. But Yoko's role was seen as different. She was seen as intrusive by those unaccustomed to such a close presence during the creative work. She's not sitting back and like one of George's friends who's sitting back and just listening. He's not literally sitting in the circle. She is sitting in the circle.
She's closer. And, you know, Cynthia, John's first wife, at least from what I know, you don't see pictures of her in the studio. But I think it's a testament to, we talked about John and Yoko's relationship. Yeah, there is some codependence there. It's not necessarily perhaps what we would perceive as the healthiest, really. I don't want to say healthiest, but
Yeah,
what
it's
I'm
hard to know.
saying is-
Yes.
I'm not saying that this is how everybody's relationship should be. Although me and Matt, when I was going to say when we record, we're like that, but we're not. We have to be in separate rooms. Otherwise it would echo. But that would be my preference, is sitting there and doing that. It's just different dynamics.
Yes. And you have to remember, she's an artist. I can see why she would want to be in that circle. And not that Linda isn't. Linda's taking photos as a photographer. But it's a different role, right?
Everybody's relationship is different. That might not be something that she wants to do, but if Yoko wants to do, I can understand why, if some of the other members of the band could be put off by it. But I don't see her doing anything wrong in that clip. And obviously, Peter Jackson has said that from what he's seen, everything seems, quote unquote, above board. There's no smoking gun that you're like,
right.
Evil Yoko, this is the moment.
Right. Because the Beatles Get Back sessions, they weren't just the source of some of their final songs. They captured something that wasn't intended, right? A band unraveling, creative tensions rising. And of course, as we said, one person who's constantly there, sometimes during arguments, even though they're not arguing about her, Yoko Ono, right? So from the moment she entered the studio, just kind of sitting casually cross-legged beside John Lennon, she became this target for interpretation, myth-making, and for some people, discomfort. McCartney, as I said, he went on the Howard Stern show. He had talked about how they thought it was a guy thing. And he says that in a way that is being negative to himself. He is saying that is not something that we should have done.
He's being reflective.
Yes, he's being very reflective. And he did say that resentments brood over small things, like she leaned on an amp or if she was using a stool. He said, quote, we were just fuming and sulking. So it wasn't about Yoko. All of them were fuming and sulking about each other. Everything anybody did rubbed people the wrong way.
Think of when you come home in your bad mood and your husband eats all the cheese for the dinner, and then it's definitely not a personal story. This has never happened.
The nighttime cheese, night cheese.
He had his night cheese, to use a Liz Lemon phrase.
Yeah, working on your night cheese.
He worked on his night cheese a little bit too hard, and then you have no cheese for dinner, and so you take it out on him, or he does something small. It's just those small things when there's obviously already this atmosphere in the studio. Things are changing. They're getting older. They're married. They're having kids. Things aren't as creatively in sync. They can't have that relationship that they had when they were really young. And that was always going to evolve. That was always going to happen, whether or not Yoko was there or not.
Exactly. They weren't spending 24 hours a day with each other, working on music together and being at the same life stages and all of that. At this point, there's a lot of hurt feelings. There's a lot of just, when relationships change, there's a lot of growing pains with that, right? At one point, Paul does mention about the amp with Yoko. He makes a joke about people blaming Yoko for breaking up the Beatles because of the amp, which is like a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is kind of interesting. But again, there was just this passive aggressiveness that simmered among the group. And Yoko became this embodiment of discomfort that at times they couldn't quite name. So sometimes at that time, they did do that. But over time, McCartney also offered a different perspective, a more generous one. So another quote from him, quote, we suddenly sort of thought, you know what? John's in love with this girl. If he wants to bring her into the studio, we've got to cope with that. And we learned to cope with that, end quote.
100%. I'm assuming that comes much later in his life, after you've been able to sit with that for a while. That's sort of what I was trying to approach it as.
Yeah.
This is a different relationship than he had with Cynthia. This person is much more of an artist. Of course, she's going to want to be involved.
Right. John and Paul as like the main songwriters of majority of the Beatles songs. Now you suddenly have this other person in there who's bringing ideas. Again, not vocally in the studio. She's quiet. She's doing other things, but that presence of her, she's in a way the third wheel, or Paul feeling like the third wheel and not knowing how to deal with that because he's in his 20s and they're all young. They don't know how to do it.
There's no coping mechanisms, or very few coping mechanisms in your 20s. I'm sure if they were older, they would have approached it in a different way. But this was at a stressful point in their lives, a turning point in their lives, and they coped with it the only way that they knew how, which was probably some passive-aggressive, masculine bullshit.
We're talking about the late 1960s. And again, Paul's acknowledging that Yoko wasn't trying to take over. That idea, she's simply existing. And we can say existing loudly in a way because she's in that inner circle in a space that was not designed for her. And that was normally the sacred Beatles space. Now, through this arc, the Get Back sessions become more than just behind the scenes footage. They're really in a case study of how Yoko Ono, as again, an avant-garde artist, a fiercely loyal partner, and later this cultural icon, was misunderstood not just by fans, but by the very people who shared the space with her. Maybe, like Paul suggests, if John had simply said, hey guys, I love her and just want to be near her, things might have settled sooner.
Men not vocalizing what they need.
I know. But instead, that ambiguity, that silent tension, you mentioned a side eye, right? That silent tension and decades of interpretation, is exactly what has made Yoko's legacy in the Beatles story so prominent.
It's an easier way to explain the end of the Beatles than talking about all the smaller things that culminated in their breakup. It's much easier to say, yeah, it was Yoko's fault. And if it wasn't for her, they would have kept playing for years and years. And anybody who approaches the Beatles, whether you were there and you're experiencing it for the first time or like us approaching it decades later, you have to have that reckoning of this amazing band only existed for this finite amount of time, just years. How do you explain that? How do you explain it when they continue to go on and do their own solo stuff? Well, the explanation, the shorthand, the easy way out is Yoko.
Right. So speaking of the Beatles broadly, how do the other members of the bands feel about Yoko kind of beyond the Get Back sessions? I'll give you some quotes to give you some insight, again, of both earlier thoughts on Yoko and evolving thoughts. We've already heard Paul's, but I'll start with Paul. So Paul McCartney has been very candid about that discomfort, especially in the earlier times in the studio. In a 2023 podcast, he said, quote, "We had a way we worked. The four of us worked with George Martin, and that was basically it. And we'd always done it like that. Yoko being in the studio was an interference in the workplace," end quote. But, as I said, even Paul, who once bristled at her presence, later softened. Quote, as I said, "If John loves this woman, that's got to be right. I realized any resistance was something I had to overcome. Now it's like we're mates. I like Yoko," end quote. So just recognizing, like with any group, right, when you have somebody else who steps into a group and changes the dynamics, it takes time and there can be hurt feelings. But over time, he realized that it wasn't Yoko's thing. It was something he had to deal with.
It was his hang up. Had nothing necessarily to do with her. It was just something that he had to take.
They recorded how many albums this way and suddenly,
And just the closeness of Paul and John. Obviously, they were not related like we are, but as twins, our dynamic changed when you get married and suddenly that person isn't everything to you. And that I feel like in some ways what is happening with Paul and John is they're negotiating that. Suddenly Yoko's this presence in John's life. She's also a competitor in terms of collaborator.
John picked her. Paul didn't pick her. So even if Paul again ends up liking her, which he does, it's like, well, I didn't pick this person to be a collaborator with, right? There's that whole piece. Moving on, in a surprise to no one, the man known as the glue of the band and the peacekeeper, Ringo Starr, he was always more chill about Yoko. He once said, quote, "I've always liked the woman. She was good for John because she had these crazy ideas too," end quote.
Ringo, I love you, Ringo.
No, you're going to love him even more here.
Okay. I was like, don't you dare make me hate Ringo Starr.
No, but you might have some issues with Paul here in a minute. But so Ringo, he even flew to be with Yoko after John's death. He was the only Beatle to do so.
Ringo, you're a top-notch man.
I know. Okay. Which I have to go into a side note, which is not part of Yoko's story, but because Paul's reaction to John's murder, which I said is not directly tied to this episode, literally when I was reading it, made me gasp. I'll tell you what Paul says.
I feel like I don't know if I know at some point I knew what he said. So we'll see. It's been a while.
So reporters asked him for a reaction the day after John's death, and his response was, quote, "It's a drag, isn't it?" end quote. That's it. It's a drag, isn't it?
Oh, no, it's not. Not a drag. Oh, Paul.
There's probably better ways to put it.
Especially as a songwriter, you should have some better words to come up with than "it's a drag."
Yeah. Supposedly, according to Paul, he was caught off guard and he said he was in shock and trying to hold it together. But like, what the fuck? When I saw "it's a drag, isn't it?" I was like, Paul, that's what you have to say.
A drag is like, oh, my DoorDash order came 20 minutes later than I wanted. That's a drag. Your best friend and collaborator for years and years getting assassinated. I feel like would be something different. different word. But I can imagine the shock, and nobody's expecting that. So I do give him some grace for that.
Yeah. George Harrison, this is where things get a little thornier. He reportedly insulted Yoko to her face in the Apple offices, and there was some tension. Some of it, though, was pretty petty. I hadn't heard about this, but there was this infamous biscuit incident in the studio. Have you heard of that?
Okay. Which is so weird because you think of George as being pretty low-key, too.
Yeah. Later, he will say about, like I said, changing thoughts. But anyway, yeah, biscuits. It just made me laugh. I saw it in an article and it just said infamous biscuit incident. So of course I was like, well, I have not heard about this. I need to look it up.
What about biscuits could be infamous?
Yeah. So during the recording sessions for Abbey Road in 1969, Yoko Ono was actually recovering from a car accident. And so she had a hospital bed wheeled into the studio so she could be near John. That alone ruffled some feathers, but the moment that really set George Harrison off was a pack of biscuits. According to the Beatles engineer Jeff Emmerich, Yoko got up from her bed, walked across the studio, and helped herself to one of George's biscuits sitting on top of his speaker cabinet.
Oh, no. Don't eat somebody else's.
George, watching from the control room, reportedly exploded, quote, "That bitch, she's taking one of my biscuits," end quote.
I know it's not supposed to be funny, but
I know.
It's hard to take that seriously. And I'm assuming biscuits, it's in the British sense as in cookies.
Cookies, yeah.
So,
I get a little bitchy over my cookies.
That bitch, she's stealing my cookies. Okay, George, we're not in kindergarten.
Right. And again, I know it seems so little, but I can already see this happening in an already tense environment. And obviously, to be clear, George's frustration was more about the disruption of the Beatles' already deteriorating working dynamic than any personal hatred towards Yoko. Obviously, when you're throwing a fit over biscuits, like,
it's not the biscuits, babe.
Yeah. And it's not Yoko. It's one thing George did also say later, but not too much later. I couldn't find a date from this quote. He was on a talk show. Couldn't have been too long after the breakup of the Beatles. I found it on YouTube. As I said, in this talk show, probably looks like mid-70s, so not too long after they broke up. He's asked about the breakup of the Beatles and about Yoko's role in it. And he said, quote, "The group had problems long before Yoko came around," end quote. So he acknowledges, again, the Beatles were unraveling, were full of tensions.
Just one other thing to add to the list. One smaller thing to add.
Right. It's not Yoko herself. It's just another piece of this already dynamic, right? You're already getting angry about biscuits, and then
there must have been some damn good cookies.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's John himself, about how he viewed the relationship to his bandmates and Yoko. He once said, quote, "I had to either be married to them or Yoko, and I chose Yoko, and that was right," end quote. Obviously, there were a lot of hurt feelings going around. Another quote to demonstrate this, John said, quote, "Ringo was all right." Of course, John didn't say that, but of course Ringo's all right.
He is.
But, quote, "But the other two really gave it to us. I'll never forgive them for how they treated her," end quote. So how has Yoko responded to the infamous Yoko broke up the Beatles myth? Yoko has said, quote, "I did not break up the Beatles. You can't have it both ways. If you're going to blame me for breaking the Beatles up, you should be thankful that I made them into myth rather than a crumbling group," end quote. So,
ooh, Yoko.
But yeah, she is obviously very adamant that she was not the sole reason.
That's much more, what do I want to say? Generous than I would give it. Be like, screw you guys. You know I did break up the Beatles. I can't believe that I'm stuck with this forever. Would probably be my quote. So,
right.
Good job for you, for rising above Yoko.
And it's also possible to talk about Yoko's public image without confronting the racism and misogyny that shaped it.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah. And I mentioned this in our Patreon episode that you can listen to. Obviously, she was not white, and she was a very outspoken woman in a time where that was not embraced. I could say we're still not necessarily embraced today, right? Being different in any way. In the Patreon episode, which I'm not going to obviously repeat here, Linda, Paul's future wife, she also had a career, had been divorced. She wasn't necessarily really welcomed by fans at first, but she was also white and American. Yoko wasn't just criticized. As I said, she was targeted. She was a Japanese woman in the middle of the most famous white rock band in the world. That alone is going to make her a target. And
yeah, unfortunately. And I wonder, like, post-World War II.
Yes, 100%. Yep. That's what I mentioned in the Patreon. This is not that long after World War II, right? We're talking like 20 years. So relations between the Japanese and the British are not like very rosy. 20 years, right, is not long at all.
Yeah, people are alive who've been through it, obviously.
Yes, exactly. And from the moment she entered the Beatles' orbit, the headlines and media were brutal. British tabloids called her, quote, the Dragon Lady, end quote, a stereotype rooted in racist caricatures of Asian women as manipulative and cold. One paper ran the headline, quote, Yoko the witch who stole John, end quote.
I love that that's just the headline. Like, obviously, this is
news, right?
Here's a factual headline.
Another, of course, dubbed her, quote, the woman who broke up the Beatles, end quote, a narrative that stuck for decades, despite all this evidence to the contrary. And in the U.S., to no surprise, it wasn't much better. A 1970s article in a major music magazine described her as, quote, shrill and, quote, unfeminine, mocking her voice.
Jeez.
A lot of people have mocked her voice. When I was on YouTube, that's pretty much almost all the videos I could find was mocking of her voice.
Yes.
So mocking her voice and appearance in ways that would have never been aimed, one, at a white female or a white male artist. Just how she, again, looked. She was her own person, right? She had her own style. Probably today she would be more of a TikTok style icon for doing her own thing.
Yes.
But at this time, no, not at all. As journalist David Sheff later wrote, that Yoko was subjected to, quote, spitball of racism, misogyny, and ignorance, end quote. And it wasn't just the press. Radio DJs refused to play her music, even in avant-garde art circles where she once had thrived, and she had been an integral part of pre-John Lennon. She suddenly was seen as the girlfriend, not the artist.
So sad.
I know. I hate that. Her identity was flattened, so she was reduced to a punchline. As you said, she's become a verb about a scapegoat, a disruption, and even these people who in the circle that she helped create, she's now kind of seen as not, again, obviously not a Nepo baby, but like, you're only in this because you're John Lennon's girlfriend or wife, right?
Yeah. That would be galling. That would be a difficult pill to swallow. Obviously, fans and stuff, again, very mixed. There are some people who do really love her. And appreciate what she's done for John's legacy, but there's that much more vocal contingent, I think, of the people who hate her. And for that, I'm always like, if Paul and Ringo and George, they could get past it and they've moved on from it, maybe you guys should too. But you weren't part of it. Like, come on. If the people who were directly involved with it, if they've been able to move on, why are we continuing to denigrate this woman for what you perceive as her role in this breakup, which you've already said you were not there.
Of course, despite all of that, Yoko being Yoko, who, again, I love that she never tries to tone herself down or make herself be more apologetic or anything. So she once said, quote, "People were angry because I was different. I was a woman, I was Asian, and I was outspoken. That was too much for some people," end quote. The backlash wasn't just about her art or her relationship. It was what she represented, a challenge to the status quo and that idea of femininity and being a female partner to a rock star, right?
It's hard even now.
100%. Yes.
Actors or athletes, singers, if they date somebody who's not exactly what the fans picture.
Yep.
It doesn't matter who they date. They will pick apart people.
I mean, the fact that we still have, how many years later, we're talking about Angelina Jolie and Jennifer Aniston with Brad Pitt, and neither are with him now, but people still come back to that.
Or the Meghan Markle of it all.
Oh, yeah.
And somebody who's different, not who you expected the Prince of the United Kingdom to marry. She's American. She's divorced. She's biracial. I don't know how these women get past it. Obviously, at least Yoko didn't have social media and all that in her time, but that doesn't mean that it's any less hurtful and insidious.
Right. Especially the fact that she's 92 now and she's still, how many times, as I was doing my research, how many times did I come across articles about her being blamed or mocked? She's been mocked longer than she's been, I don't want to say revered, but like in her early life as an artist, she got acclaim. And of course, some people didn't like it, but art historians.
She's had to live with the moniker of the person who broke up the Beatles way longer than the Beatles were together.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. For how many years? We're talking about them breaking up when they're in their 20s. She's 92 now, and she still has to hear that.
You have to be a pretty strong person to deal with that and deal with that in healthy ways. I would just have crawled into a little ball. Don't think that there's any way I would have been able to get out of it, at least get out of it in a healthy manner.
Right. Our last segment about Yoko's legacy, from scapegoat to icon. Like a lot of women, I know this is shocking, in recent years, the way we talk about women, particularly Yoko Ono, has started to shift. After decades of being dismissed, mocked, and blamed, there's finally a broader recognition that, love her or don't get her, that Yoko changed culture and that she's still here. So you can see it in documentaries, retrospectives, even in how other Beatles have come to speak about her. Another quote from Paul McCartney in a 2013 interview, he said, quote, "She certainly didn't break the group up. The group was breaking up," end quote. He admitted that he unfairly resented her for a while, not because she caused the band split, but because she represented change. Quote, "When John got with Yoko, she was showing him another way to be, and he was learning that. And I found it a bit intrusive, but I don't blame her now," end quote. Learning as a 20-something-year-old, changing, you might not be there, your dynamic, your friendship is changing. Those things all come together. Julian Lennon, John's son with Cynthia, his first wife, who for years held Yoko at arm's length, has also shifted his stance. He told Rolling Stone in 2020, quote, "We've had our differences, but we found a way to build something respectful. I've seen how hard she fought to protect Dad's legacy," end quote.
If people love John, you have to at least give it to Yoko. Not that he would have been forgotten if she wasn't around, but she really pushed him from, again, I don't want to say that he would have been forgotten because he's a Beatle, but she made him more than just his assassination, more than just his work with the Beatles.
Right.
The things that we commend him for have all been highlighted and pushed by Yoko after his death. Obviously, the activism was there before, but she's been very protective of his legacy. Another woman, another person could have just sort of let it be. Oh, God. There we go. Another one. Shoot. Okay, that was not planned, but another one would have let it be. But that's not her. She loved this man, and she has that love for him still, and is going to use that love to continue to push for things that they both loved, whether it's peace, and just to highlight him as an artist in all those respects. And again, she didn't have to necessarily do that. She didn't have to do it so hard. She could have backed off after a certain point, but she's never done that.
Exactly, yeah. I think that's a really important thing. The Beatles are always going to be iconic, but she's also turned John Lennon into his own cultural icon.
Which I think, coming from us, her work had already started and was already implanted by the time we came around to the Beatles. But for other people, I'm sure they've seen that evolution of him become sort of like a brand in a way.
Yeah.
And that's been because of her. Other people have been involved, but for the most part, it's been mainly Yoko. She's been at the head of that, and that's love.
It is, yeah. How many years later, still talking about what he did and what he brought to the world. So scholars and critics are finally giving Yoko her due after so many years of being dismissed as weird or indulgent. So her early work now is recognized as groundbreaking, especially in the world of conceptual and performance art. Exhibitions like the Music of the Mind retrospective at the Tate Modern have reframed her as a visionary, not just, quote, John Lennon's wife doing weird stuff. Like, as you said, there are these exhibitions that are exhibiting her work, not because she's John Lennon's wife, but as an artist. Today's pop culture has responded to her positively. So artists like Lady Gaga, Janelle Monáe, and Bjork, unsurprisingly for Bjork, I saw that, have cited Yoko as a key influence, not just for her art, but for her guts. She was doing performance art about gender, power, and peace decades before it became trendy. And however you think about her work, she never watered it down to make it more palatable to anyone. It wasn't like, hey, yeah, now I'm John Lennon's wife. I got to make this kind of more something that Beatles fans are going to like.
Right? Yeah, or just step away from it entirely, which you got. Again, if I had the money, I'd be like, peace, I'm living on an island. I'm not doing anything. Like, you guys have been so cruel to me my entire adult life, essentially. I'd be like, peace, literally. I'm going on an island. See ya never.
And look, I get it, right? She's still not for everyone. Her music's loud, it's dissonant. You can say it's totally out there, which some people love. As we said, art is totally subjective.
If you don't like it, switch it off. There's so much music out there. Nobody's telling you you have to listen to it. We have free will. If you don't like it, don't seek it out.
It might not be your thing. Her art is minimalist, sometimes confrontational, but that's pretty much the point. She wants us to feel, to question, to do. It's very much inviting the audience in. And that for you, that might not be what you want to do. Again, you might want to stare at a Van Gogh or look at the Mona Lisa. And I'm not saying you're bad for doing that, but that's not her art.
But that doesn't mean that hers isn't art.
Right, exactly. It doesn't make it any lesser. In one of her later interviews, she said, quote, I'm not afraid of being misunderstood. I'm afraid of not saying what I need to say, end quote. And that's really the energy I'd say that she's carried through her whole life. Not needing to be liked, just needing to feel and be real and create the art that she wants to create. Yeah, was she controversial? Absolutely. Misunderstood? Often. But more and more, I think we can see that the world is catching up to the woman who was always, it felt like, ahead of the game. She was always doing her own thing, and we see that more acceptable now. And she was doing that at a time when it was certainly not as popular. Now it's judgment time. I guess I have to go first.
Yeah. You have to go first because it's always the person who presents.
I know. I'm just joking. I was waiting for you to prompt me. I've got to say I'm very pro Yoko for doing our scale. What have we've said like a normal person? What, like anybody who is complex and not a
don't
saint.
know, like
It's
80,
like 80, 20,
85, 50,
85, 15, yeah.
or like 90, 10, somewhere around there.
Oh, that's generous for people, for human beings.
Yeah.
I don't.
Wow, like
I'm
it could be
human.
somewhere between there.
Yeah. I think most humans range in the 85, 15 area. I might even think she's a little bit better than maybe most humans is generous. Like that's
Yeah.
like I would say I would say overall a good person. I think from the start she was herself in a time when even today, I mean, we were born in the 80s. Even when we were growing up as millennials, it was hard to be different. You know, how you dress or music you like or what you do.
It's way easier to go with the flow and to just fit in. So,
Right.
I mean, that's what people, and I think instinctually a lot of people do, just want to fit in.
You want to be part of a group.
Yeah, you don't want to stand out.
I feel like in today's world with like TikTok and different things, there's two segments, right? There's the blending in of like Kardashian beauty and beauty trends that are like, this is what's seen as beautiful in our world. Body hair mostly is ew, you know, on women, yuck, things like that. Like being skinny is celebrated. But there's also people who, I would say large segments who are pushing against that narrative and have, I would say, more of a backing than like what Yoko was doing at the time. Women who choose not to shave their armpits and women who, again, are saying, no, I'm not going to wear makeup or I'm going to wear makeup only because it makes me happy, not to because I want to come off as feminine. You can find more support of those people because of of social media and the internet. Like you can find those communities. And obviously Yoko Ono was part of the avant-garde art community, but as I said, as she became connected with Lennon, she became kind of pushed out of that. I don't know how much, and I can't say I didn't find it in my research. I didn't specifically look for it. I don't know how much social support she had or like what her support system looked like around her, but that would be really hard when at a time when you can't find other people who are different like you or willing to step out there and do art that's different, look different than all the other, again, Beatles wives and girlfriends who are models, former Bond girls.
Yes.
I cannot imagine the constant media presence and hatred.
Could not have done that. I would have just curled into a little ball and be like, just going to hang out here for the next couple decades and scream and cry.
Right. How would you not just want to retreat into your bubble and be like, nope, I'm not doing this. I'll create my art to myself as my personal thing, but I'm not going to showcase it because I don't want to hear all the bullshit. But the fact that she still continued not only to create art, but to exhibit it, speak out, and call things for what they were. No, this is misogyny. This is racism. That's not going to get her more fans from the people who already are on the fence or dislike her.
No.
She just never played it safe. She never, like the phrasing of, she never made herself more palatable to Beatles fans or to the public.
Which is saying a lot because I think even if you are very secure in yourself, there's usually some thought of it's going to be easier on me if I try to do this because I'm trying to protect myself. The fact that she was able to do that and come out, I obviously don't know how much an impact it had on her mental health, but she's always seemed gracious and seemed above it, which is impressive for somebody who gets so much shit thrown at them. Even now.
Right. Yeah, she'll call it out, but she doesn't dwell on it. She's not like, hey, you assholes. I would be like, fuck you.
That would be more my style. So that's what I'm saying. Like the graciousness is unexpected and in a lot of ways undeserved. But I guess that just shows what kind of person she is, that she's always been, like you said, she knows who she is, take it or leave it.
She names it. She names it, right?
It's really hard. That's really hard to get to. And I'm impressed that she's been able to, it seems like, find that pretty early on and then continue that and not question.
Yeah. And I think, as we said, while her relationship with John it's always so hard to judge relationships because you're not in it. And obviously it sounded like the dynamics were sometimes unhealthy, but we also see that they, I think, did bring out different things in each other. And I think John, it wasn't like Yoko made him be this certain way. It was like he was looking for change. He was wanting to be.
He was a young man. He was a young
Yeah.
man. He was evolving.
Yeah, and I feel like in a way, a lot of times he was lost. And she, as he mentioned in the first episode, he really saw her as a teacher. She is a respected avant-garde artist, and he's wanting to learn how she conceptualized the world, how she sees things. And I think that's really a different dynamic, especially in the 1960s, where I mean, he's fucking John Lennon.
He doesn't need to learn anything.
Right. Yeah. The fact that he's like, I want to evolve. I want to go into these more experimental works. And she's pushing me to be that person. She's pushing me to make music that's more me or more authentic. That's a great both artistic partnership and then obviously also a relationship in general of making each other better, especially in this case, in their work and their art. I think also understanding who John was and understanding that they were both complicated people. And that's where I feel like the piece I can't judge is the relationship. It seems like she, during times for him that were difficult, that she gave him the space and they reconnected after the lost weekend. And I just think, like we say, like models of like, what would you want to do to change the world peace? And peace has become this, in a way, cheesy. Even the peace sign, right, has become, I feel like, I don't want to say weaponized, but become a cheesy thing.
As the young kids say, cringe. It's very cringe.
Oh, cringe. Okay. Yeah, of course. But she has always been very loyal to that. And I think she's just been she's looked at it in different lenses, whether it's feminist lens, right, when it comes to abuse, war, obviously. I think you can call her an idealist, but I think there's a lot worse things to be, especially having led the life that she has. Yeah, I think there's a lot worse things to be than an idealist.
Yeah, obviously the one big thing against her has always been the breakup of the Beatles. And you already disentangled that. So what you're left with is a human person who has human flaws, but yes, is perhaps more idealist than even most of us. She's an artist, and with that comes some judgment and scrutiny, especially towards her art. But that's the name of the game, and I don't find her the villain of the story. I commend her for being able to get on with her life after not only being villainized herself, but then the assassination of her husband. To not lose herself after that, not lose her idealism, was also impressive. I think that would take down a lot of us. And, you know, again, their story starts in a messy, murky way. But the thing is, there's so many other musicians and things that happens. I remember reading about Bruce Springsteen with his wife, and it's like those relationships are, I don't want to say it loud, they're given
more grace.
Yeah, much more than Yoko and John. That's not to excuse them. It's just relationships are messy. Relationships of any kind are messy. And
yeah,
again, if Cynthia and the people who are directly involved are able to get past it, who am I to say, sitting on a podcast mic and saying, well, she's an awful person for inserting herself into this marriage? That's not my place to say. And that's human messiness. That's just normal. You don't have to be a rock star to get into that kind of mess.
Right.
There's not really anything, if you take away the Beatles part.
Right.
What are you left with? A woman who's gone through multiple traumas in her life and continues to create art and obviously sees the world in a way that I guess I wish that the world reflected back.
That's a really good way to put it because, yeah, that has definitely not been the case.
Not my world.
I think that's a great quote to end it on before we kind of go into our ending segment. So hopefully you learned something new about Yoko today, and maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. We know there's plenty of people on both sides. You can share that right in the comments, right? We ourselves, and I know, Aaron, you've mentioned it many times, you and Matt have your own conversations outside the podcast about your judgments and whether you agree with each other or not. So you can always send us a listener judgment that we can read on air. We did that in some of our earlier episodes. We haven't gotten any recently, but our email is ambivalent.offenders.podcast@gmail.com. It can be written. You could record it however you want to do it. It can be anonymous, however you want to interact. And as I said, if you want to, please, we would love it. Love it. Just tap that review, tap that rating takes probably all of 2 seconds. Review maybe 10 seconds, 20 seconds to write something up. That would be
I'm not as brave and resilient as Yoko, so help my fragile feelings.
Yeah, please. But I think it's always good to hear feedback from our listeners, especially, as I said, if there's certain episodes that you've really enjoyed, or there's eras or people you want to hear us cover, you can put that in a review or in an email, anything like that. Anyways, hit that follow button. And another thing, again, join us on Patreon to hear more. As we said, we have those upcoming series, one on the Get Back footage that we were talking about from Peter Jackson, and then one I know Aaron was doing on Nefertiti. There we go. Yeah. So we have some definitely different and interesting and definitely varying people from different backgrounds coming up. We're usually in the summer trying to hit close to every other week, but sometimes it's sooner. So that's where hitting that follow button wherever you listen will alert you when new episodes come out. So that's, I would say, that or following us on Instagram is the best way to know when new episodes come out. Because sometimes, again, you get a little extra ones before every 2 weeks, and other times I might have to wait a little bit. But that's it for Yoko today. That's it for our podcast. I guess we should say peace. Peace out, right?
Peace and love. Bye, guys.